Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is lessons we've learned. We learned how to treat ourselves by the way that others treat us. And in so many situations, we have been taught to be self-hating and denying our needs. We've learned to belittle and judge ourselves critically. And so we're going to talk about the dynamic of that today and how we might be able to relinquish those patterns and supplant them with life-affirming, more expansive messaging. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding into your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating this brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and very softly rub your fingers against your palms to feel that sensation, to feel the deliciousness of the tickling and the tingling and the warmth or the cool, and allow that sensation to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome, Rosalind. Good morning. So good to have you here with us this morning. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. I guess things are working on Facebook, which is awesome. If you guys want to add comments, please go to the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and you can leave comments there, and then I can respond to them because otherwise I don't see them. So today we're talking about lessons we've learned. And this came up with several people in my coaching practice yesterday. So I'm just going to, good morning, Robin. Wonderful to have you here with us. So anyway, we're going to talk about lessons learned. And what I mean by it, by lessons learned today, the lessons that we're talking about expressly today, is the lessons that we learn in how to behave. We learn how to treat ourselves through the way that other people treat us. And we also learn how to treat ourselves by modeling our parents, and not only how they treat us, but how they treat themselves and each other. And so we have these models of behavior that we are exposed to from a young age, and we don't question those things because that is how we're taught people interact with each other. So Rosalind says, not letting anyone should on you. I love that, Rosalind. Exactly. So the thing is that because we are immersed in these environments when we're growing up, we don't know different. It's all that we know. So we don't know if there is a dysfunctional relationship between people in our household. If people express anger and disdain to one another, that's what we learn. That's how we learn to interact. If people are always blaming and shaming, then that's how we learn to interact. And the fascinating thing is that because, here we are in a family ecosystem, that's what we know, that's our only reference point. And when we get out into a broader world, then we often find the contrast of other people's behavior and recognize that, oh my gosh, like this is not the norm. This is not okay. And the other thing that we also tend to do, which is fascinating, is that we internalize these behaviors. So when we're treated poorly, when we're treated in a dismissive way, when we're told to be quiet, or children are seen and not heard, or when we're essentially told that what we think or feel doesn't matter. Good morning, Lisa. So good to have you here with us this morning. Welcome. We're talking about lessons we learn. And these lessons are lessons of how to be with each other, but even perhaps more importantly, with ourselves. So when people are telling us that we're not important, when people are telling us to be seen and not heard, when people are telling us that what we feel doesn't matter, or that we're not good enough, or that we're not smart enough, or that we're not attractive enough, or that we're too chatty, or we're too much, or we're too noisy, or we're too whatever. Good morning, Robin. Welcome. So good to have you here. I think you are here twice. How awesome to have you here on Facebook and on YouTube. Anyway, when we're taught these things, what happens is that we ultimately internalize them, and then we become the one that is telling ourselves that we're not important, that what we feel doesn't matter, that what we have to say is irrelevant, that we are too much, that we talk too much, that we, whatever it is, that we're either too much or we're not enough. And then when we've internalized those messages, we repeat them over and over and over to ourselves. And those things carry into our adulthood and impact all of our relationships. So the insidious thing about these lessons is that they're invisible. We don't recognize them. And they have such a profound impact on the way that we show up in the world to ourselves and to others. And so it's a fascinating thing, and so powerful when we have the ability to identify and recognize these things as lessons that we've learned, because we're all really good students in certain ways. And if we're told that we're stupid, if we're told that we're too much, too intense, too this, too that, too sensitive, then when we have our own experiences, we often lobby the same criticisms against ourselves, lob the same criticisms against ourselves. So Lisa says, today's the first day I've been able to find you in a while. I missed you. I haven't been getting notifications, nor have I been able to find you. Well, Lisa, we thank you for your persistence. Enlightened World Network was having a lot of challenges because apparently the algorithms changed on Facebook, which made it so that Restream didn't connect properly. And so it didn't show up on the Facebook page. So I'm thrilled that you found us and that things are working again. And it is through a monumental effort of the home team and in Enlightened World Network that things are back up and running. So thank you to Sue and to Dido for your tireless efforts in working this through. So Rosalind says, so where did the beginning happen? As soon as we're born? I think that's a great question. And we can actually look generationally, I think, for where the beginnings happen, because I really do recognize that there are generational patterns of behavior. Like in my family, I've seen generational pattern of anger, and it's growing up in an environment of anger. You learn that anger is the way to express, right? And you internalize that anger and externalize that anger too, right? And so breaking those patterns, when we talk about healing, I deeply believe that as we heal ourselves, we heal generations. We certainly heal generations going forward, but I believe that we also are healing generations going back. And because there's this interconnectedness and this energetic pattern that goes through generations. And so I remember having a client whose mom was really, really self-critical, critical of herself. And so the client that I had modeled this behavior very, very well, because that's what she was taught. That was how she was taught one should relate to oneself, right? We don't think about it. We just perceive it. We learn it. We incorporate it. We internalize it. And then that became her own pattern. And it was so powerful when she started recognizing, oh my gosh, I don't have to blame myself for it. So here's the thing. I'm all about taking personal responsibility. The thing is that oftentimes when we think about responsibility, it's very closely coupled with the notion of blame. And Enlightened World Network is either Dido or Sue are chiming in saying, we're so glad things are working again. You and me both, and everybody who's joining us, we're all so appreciative. So, and we so appreciate your efforts to make it work, because I know it wasn't easy. Anyway, we tend to, in our self-criticism, we tend to blame ourselves, right? Not only are we being self-critical, but then we notice that we're being self-critical, and then we blame ourselves and make ourselves wrong for that, right? And the thing that's really important, Lisa, you're so sweet. Mira in the morning, that's a riot. So what happens is that we see these behaviors in ourselves, and it's not enough that we suffer as a result of those behaviors, but then we blame ourselves and make ourselves wrong for having those behaviors. Now, as I was saying, I'm all about responsibility, in that we take responsibility for our actions and our behaviors, and understand that that doesn't mean blame. So when we're talking about being responsible for ourselves, what we can be looking at is, oh, wow, I've got this pattern. I get to move through that. I get to learn from it. I get to evolve around it. I get to notice it and make the effort necessary to shift that for my own welfare and that welfare of others. So here's the thing, while we're recognizing it, I think that there's tremendous power available to us when we recognize that we did not generate that pattern out of a vacuum, that we were taught, that we learned. And so this isn't to blame anybody else for our behavior, but it's to recognize the source. And when we recognize that this is something learned and not necessarily something innate to us, then we can open up the possibility more readily to learn something else. Does that make sense? And I think it's very freeing to recognize, oh my gosh, this is a pattern that I learned. I learned how to do this, and I learned really well because I'm such a good student, and I'm such a good daughter that I would learn how to do this from my parents, right? And now that I'm aware of it, I'm not blaming my parents. I'm just identifying, oh, wow, this is the source. Now I can look at what it might be to, good morning, Kimberly, welcome. Oh, you already said, now, so Kimberly was on Facebook and it's now on YouTube. You guys are, I'm all discombobulated here, but you're everywhere, all of you. I love it. So anyway, what we get to do is to learn new behaviors, to identify a behavior as a behavior rather than an is, rather than this is how the world is. We also learn our perspectives and our prejudices from our upbringing, right? We learn our opinions about others. We're indoctrinated to these perspectives. And then there will come a time where we get to start to choose. The thing that's so fascinating to me is as we start to choose, we get to see these behaviors and how deeply ingrained they are in the face of trying to change. So, this brings up the topic of change, and how when we make a commitment to shift something, that's often when things hit the fan, because we get to see how deeply entrenched something is. Like as soon as we endeavor to make a change in something, that's where we encounter the resistance of that thing. Oftentimes when we choose to change that we encounter massive breakdown, right? As we're trying to break through, we encounter the challenge that is inherent in making that change. So recognizing the thing that we're wanting to shift is just the very first step. Lisa says, I was able to recognize patterns by watching my other family members. There was so much anger and disdain in my dad's family. Yeah, exactly. So as you see, like this is a pattern of engagement, how people interact with each other, and they teach each other how to treat each other and then themselves, right? We internalize these behaviors, and oftentimes it is easier to see in people outside yourself, for sure. And the thing is that we get to recognize that the things we see are reflections of our own being and perception. So that's a powerful thing to recognize. Rosalind says, the life lesson I'm navigating is to dissolve boundaries, good and bad, becoming more inseparable, seeing illusions as not real, breaking down the barrier for myself to tend to compare rather than seeing two sides of the coin, good versus bad, like seeing the candlesticks or the faces. Instead, getting curious and sit in the space to observe different perspectives. So that's a mouthful, Rosalind. Really big stuff that you're up to here. And as we look at dissolving boundaries, I think that's a really interesting conversation, because I know that so many of us have such undefined parameters, that we will allow certain things that perhaps wow. Okay, so the boundary thing is a whole other conversation, and I don't think I want to go there today, but I think that by being present, as you're saying, getting curious, sitting in a space to be able to observe and recognize and be responsive to whatever's there rather than reactive, that's a super, super powerful place to be. And good for you, Rosalind. It's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to be present and not in all the judgment, right? And judgment and reactivity. And we have varying abilities to be moving out of that space. So I grew up in a family with a lot of prejudice, and it was antithetical to my being. Like, it just hurt my soul. And it was horrifying to me to hear some of the internal voices that would be automatic in the face of different circumstances. And it was just horrifying to recognize those words in my head. It's like, where did that come from? It wasn't coming from me. It was in my head. Nobody else was speaking it. So in that respect, it was mine. And it was not in any way reflective of my beliefs, my feelings, my aesthetic even. And so I think it's very powerful to be in this place. I mean, that happened for me for years, where these snippets of ugliness would just pop up in my head uninvited, and it would jolt me, it would jostle me, and the just horrify me, and the tendency was to want to beat myself up for those things in my head. And I finally recognized that, whoa, you know what? Yes, it's in my head. It's kind of programmed in there, but it's not who I am. It's not reflective of the choices that I make. It's not reflective even of my perspective. And as I stopped resisting those voices, as I stopped making them so important by resisting them, as I could allow them to just be like, wow, there it is again. That's so wild that it's here. It could just go and pass through without having to leave such a devastating mark. I don't know if you guys have experiences like that. We might even have messaging about ourselves that we had been indoctrinated to, like that, that kind of damaging interaction, where there are messages of, well, you're just stupid, or you're just worthless, just you're too much, you're too sensitive, whatever it is, like these messages, maybe that comes into your head. And the thing is that we don't have to pay attention to it. We don't have to give it credibility. We can just notice, oh my gosh, there it is again. Isn't that wild? Despite everything, there it is. It's still there. Kimberly says, that's so healing. I have experienced this. I'm glad that you're finding it healing, Kimberly, because I guarantee you, you are not the only one to have experienced this. And what we get to do is know that just because that messaging is coming through our head, it doesn't mean that it has to be meaningful to us. It doesn't mean that we have to resist it or change it. We can just allow it to float through and notice it and not make more meaning of it. Good morning, Elaine. So lovely to have you here with us. Welcome. We're talking about lessons we've learned and how so many of the negative behaviors toward ourselves have been behaviors that we've learned. And when we recognize that these are learned responses, then we can also recognize that we have the ability to learn something else, that we can learn something more life affirming. And so Lisa says, when I was going through my medical issues, I took meds that made me act out. Finally, my stepmom said, "Why are you so angry?" That shook me up. Then I started my own healing journey. Well, what a blessing it was that your stepmom had the courage to ask you, why are you so angry? And what a wonderful thing that you had the presence to recognize that there was something that you had the opportunity to shift and the courage to step into that. So congratulations for that, Lisa. Kimberly said, I heard spoiled brat from my mom floating through my head. I'm not worthy, and many, many more. So this is, Kimberly, thank you so much for sharing that. You're not alone in having those messages floating through your head too. And the thing is that because we were immersed in those kinds of environments, we learned that that is how it is. We learned that that's the truth, right? And what we get to do is recognize that it's not the truth. And those are things we learned, right? And we learned someone who's calling us a spoiled brat is projecting their own pain, perhaps their own selfishness, perhaps their own spoiledness, perhaps their helplessness. I mean, there's a number of things that could have been projected that came through in that damaging messaging, but it's a message that you learned. It's not something that you have to keep. And Robin says, okay, the comments our elders have imprinted on our life, we have taken upon ourselves to self-affect mentally. Very much so, Robin, right? Because as children, we're really imprintable, right? And we learn these things. We learn by observation. We learn by messaging. And what happens is that we internalize all of these lessons. When we get to identify that this was just something we learned, it doesn't mean it's true, then we have the opportunity to learn something new. And yeah, so powerful conversation this morning, folks. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's really important and valuable to start to recognize the lessons we've learned, and then to give ourselves the opportunity to learn something new that will be more life affirming, and to recognize, that we're kind of a perpetuation. As long as we're not conscious, we're a perpetuation of patterns. And when we allow ourselves to become aware of those patterns, then we can begin to have some freedom and to observe them, hopefully without getting hooked too much by them, less and less and less over time, and not make those patterns mean that there's something wrong with us. We learned, and we learned well. So Elaine says, my life experiences have shown the way to know my true self as love by experiences of what love is not. Wow. Powerful, Elaine. And first, see who I am not to see the truth. So powerful. And for me, so grateful for all experiences. Beautiful, Elaine. Really powerful that we often get to see ourselves by what we're not. The unfortunate thing is that in so many cases, we get all kinds of messaging about what we're not, that we should be, and then we internalize those messages. And it's when we can start recognizing that those are things we learned, then we maybe start to be able to have some freedom around that. Lisa says, it's been wonderful spending this time. I truly missed my morning talk and your words of wisdom. Lisa, thank you so much. I'm so glad you've been able to join us. And Dido, thank you so much for all that you do and for being present for these conversations. And Rosalind says, we're learning the nature of ourselves, our true selves, doing so with compassion for self, going through this journey. Yes, that's the ultimate journey, isn't it? The unfoldment of our true selves. So with that, so much love to all of you. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page, as long as it's all working, and at 9 a.m. Eastern. And I just want to encourage you to check out all the other wonderful programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living and EWN, One with the Earth. And Elaine says, blessings to all on the path as it unravels. And Kimberly, love you too. And so wonderful to be with you guys. Hope to see you again here really, really soon.